In emergency management, the definition of a stakeholder is any person or entity with a vested interest in the survival or recovery of a given community.
This is the Stakeholder Prepping podcast, where the tactical comes from the practical, and today, you become your own stakeholder.
Here are your hosts, Chris and AC.
Welcome back to Stakeholder Prepping, where you, yes, you are the stakeholder in your own survival. And over the last 3 weeks, we've talked about panic and community and adaptation. And so today we're continuing our Resiliency series, and we're talking about something that eventually catches every single person listening, whether you like it or not, regardless of how prepared, how experienced, how capable or intelligent or motivated they happen to be. And that is exhaustion. Not just being tired, not needing that extra cup of coffee, but real exhaustion. The kind that sneaks up on people, changes the way they think, affects the way they make decisions, and really kind of quietly creates problems long before they realize what's happening. And honestly, AC, I think this might be one of the most relatable topics we've covered in this entire series, because I pretty well guarantee every single listener has been exhausted at some point, unless we have like the 4-year-old listener that's just sitting in the back seat doodling with their crayons, you know?
If we have a 4-year-old listener, I think we should watch our mouths a little more. So, in fact, it's funny because one of our listeners, RJ, he won Battle Games Season 2. He said that his kid, I don't think his kid is very old. I forget. He definitely told me how old his kid is, but he said his kid requests us now on car rides. I'm not kidding. And I was like, that's cool. I mean, we're getting to the younger generation here. But yeah, I said, man, we should probably really watch our mouth then if we've got if we have children listeners. But you're right. Kids don't really get exhausted at all, do they? But
no, they're just, they are the Energizer bunnies, you know?
Right. Well, and, neither one of us have kids. So, we're just like that awesome uncles that we just fill them full of sugar and shake them up. So, of course, they don't ever get exhausted.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. But, yeah, I don't think it's a stretch to say most people listening are probably just exhausted right now. I mean, maybe not this catastrophic exhaustion, but modern life has a way of slowly draining people. And that's just modern conveniences and tech and things like that, between work and family and obligations and finances and responsibilities and travel and health concerns and unexpected emergencies and social commitments. And then somehow you're expected to do all the other things you have to do, right? The meal prep, and you have to exercise, and you have to stay informed, and you've got to answer emails and remember birthdays and listen to awesome podcasts and all those kinds of things. So you have to drink enough water to do that. But somewhere along the line, people started treating exhaustion like a personality trait instead of a warning sign, right? They started treating it as a feature, not a bug.
Yeah. And I mean, adulting sucks.
Adulting sucks.
There's no two ways about it. Being an adult sucks, but there's almost this strange pride attached to it sometimes. People compare schedules the way that fishermen compare catches, and you think you're busy, let me tell you about how busy I am, and look at how busy my calendar is. It looks like a rainbow unicorn milkshake. And we've somehow convinced ourselves that constantly running on fumes is evidence of productivity. And I just,
Right.
I don't know where that happened. I guess it was with the advent of the internet, maybe, but
Yeah, it is like a humble brag to just say that you're exhausted and tired all the time. 100%. It absolutely is. It's funny because think about how many phone calls I get from, people that I'm working with or something. And it's always like, how you doing? It's like, oh, man, like people are just kind of exhausted all the time, right? And to be fair, the preparedness communities aren't immune to that. We tend to celebrate capability and discipline and hard work and perseverance and all that kind of stuff. And those are all great things. They're all very good things. But every now and then that slides into something a little less healthy. The idea that the solution to every problem is simply pushing harder. I guess sometimes that works, and sometimes it just absolutely doesn't. And Chris, I know you probably heard this in the Army, but you always save a little, right? You always save a little, so you got a little more to give all the time.
Yeah, and sometimes it really is that gut check. Like, all right, are you really done, or
Yeah,
can you give a little bit more? Do you have any left in the tank? And you find
Right.
that extra, like, all right, there's the reserve switch. All right, let's kick it into
Right.
high gear and really
we're
go.
running
But-
on vapor, Mav.
yeah, it's weird, and that's where you get those stories of the woman who lifted the car off of her child because they got stuck under it.
Right.
There's no reasonable math that makes that work, but
Right.
all of the fuel was right then and there and lit on fire. But that doesn't mean that that's going to work every time, and sometimes the gas just is not in the tank. And if you go long enough and burn enough fumes, you're going to eventually burn out. And I think that's one of the biggest myths about toughness is it starts to fall apart right there. Toughness is valuable. Discipline is valuable. Endurance is valuable. But exhaustion doesn't care how tough you think you are, right? Eventually, it starts collecting payment. And when that debt comes due, it's going to come with an interest payment as well. And it's a balloon interest payment. So the question isn't whether exhaustion affects you. The question is whether you notice it before it starts affecting your decisions. Because when that balloon interest payment comes due, it comes due all at once.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I never heard exhaustion compared to like subprime mortgage rates and like the housing bubble, but you're right. It's
Yeah.
true, man. If you keep going and keep going, then bad things are going to happen. And that's the part I think people really do miss. Most of us think exhaustion is like a comfort issue. We think it makes us cranky or irritable, maybe a little slower. And the reality is much more interesting and way more dangerous than that. Exhaustion doesn't just change how you feel. It really, like, truly changes the way you think.
Exactly. I mean, look at what the NIH and the CDC and decades of sleep research have all been pointing to with this same conclusion. Fatigue degrades cognitive performance, just flat out. Memory gets worse, attention gets worse, decision making gets worse, problem solving gets worse, situational awareness gets worse. I think there was an episode of Mythbusters where they did, staying up for 24 hours versus drinking alcohol, and they did the driving test, and they came up with the same result. Staying awake versus drinking, you're cognitively impaired to the same level or worse if you're tired. And the scary part is that exhausted people often don't realize how impaired they've become because they think they're just fine.
Yeah, and obviously that creates some incredible comedy in hindsight. Every listener's done this, right? You've walked into a room and you've like forgotten why you were there, or you opened the refrigerator and stared at it for 30 seconds and somehow walked away without like the thing you originally came there for, or you've spent 5 minutes looking for your glasses while you're wearing your glasses, and it's all fun and games, right?
Yeah, I've looked for my phone while using the flashlight on my phone.
Right, and then that right there is advanced fatigue.
That's not even my worst one. I spent several minutes trying to remember where I had set down a clipboard while actively writing on the clipboard.
Yeah, I feel like that's less of a memory problem and more like your brain is just sort of filing a formal protest.
I mean, that's entirely possible because it was staff duty and I really did not want to be there. So that's
Yeah.
That's fully within the realm of possibility.
Have you seen, speaking of clipboards, have you seen our guys, the Hardwire that make the bulletproof vest and stuff? They have a level 3A clipboard, which I think is the coolest thing. They sell those like military bases all over the place. Because you think about it, you're always holding that clipboard right there over center mass, and that's right where somebody's going to shoot. And it's just a clipboard. You wouldn't know. It's just the clippy thing.
I have, and they are awesome. They
I think
come
those things
with,
are so cool.
yeah. The only thing you're gonna get out of that is some papers flying and maybe some sore thumbs, but it's going to save your life if ever it comes to it.
Yeah,
I
it's
love that
actually
concept.
it's actually just their backpack insert, but it just happens to have the little clipboardy clippy thing on top. And I think it's just an awesome piece of gear. It's like one of those, multi-role pieces of gear, right? I mean, for me, that's the ultimate piece of gear, that it just happens to do two things like that. And who would have thought, oh yeah, it's the clipboard, but it also could, save your life anyway. But yeah, so I think the funny thing that makes us laugh at these examples, I mean, that's pretty harmless, right? But most of the time, they're just funny stories like, oh man, I was so tired, I did this stupid thing. But the same cognitive decline that makes you lose your keys is also affecting much bigger decisions. And that's, I think, where things start becoming very important. And I want to tell a little story about the Navy's 7th Fleet because I've spent a lot of time with them. And a few years ago, the Navy 7th Fleet went through a huge upset when severe fatigue and lack of rest were officially cited as contributing factors for the 2017 collisions between, it was the USS Fitzgerald and the USS John S. McCain. It resulted in the deaths of like 17 sailors. Do you remember that?
I think so. Yeah.
It was
That-
a big
was
it
that
was a
it?
big deal, man. They started bumping into stuff. 7th Fleet was bumping into stuff, and it's because they had exhausted sailors, and sleep deprivation in the 7th Fleet has been a severe and well documented, and they actually called it an operational crisis. Like, sailors historically reported 100-hour work weeks and routine work days that passed like 12 hours, and that leads to chronic fatigue and profound mental health issues. And tragically, it actually led to deaths at sea. So these deadly mishaps actually happen, and they cited these guys being exhausted. And, since then, they've implemented these minimum sleep requirements. So now they mandate that sailors are provided the opportunity to sleep for 7.5 hours per 24-hour shift, or they must have this uninterrupted 7.5 hour block, or at least like 6 hours and combined with an hour and a half nap, or those kinds of things. And they've revamped their whole watch schedules because of this. So commands shifted towards the sort of circadian friendly watch rotations, meaning that you're like always on that same 24-hour cycle rather than constantly shifting watch times. And this helps prevent exhaustion. And they've even given sailors like fatigue management tools. So the surface fleet, at least, has implemented these countermeasures like issuing specialized eyewear and, an hour or two before bed. This kind of help assists the body in that natural sleep wake cycle. And I was actually with a coxswain on an FPM, which is their force protection medium. I think it's like a 30-ish foot boat. It's basically like a harbor security boat that they've got, a handful of mod deuces on, and it's harbor security guys, like shore patrol dudes. And that's what they use for their harbor security, both here domestically and overseas. And this coxswain was telling me about falling asleep doing harbor security duty, and he was like almost ran the boat into some Arleigh Burke class destroyer. Like, he's just cruising along and like starting to nod off, and then he's getting his ass chewed by his chief petty officer, and he's literally falling asleep while he's being screamed at for falling asleep.
God.
You know what I mean? Like, just like that tired. And this is the funny thing, and I'd like to get your take on this if this happened at all, like in the Army. But these guys, these sailors, especially aboard ship, they are guilty of kind of perpetuating this, because they will they'll give each other grief for being rack hounds. And, basically any sailor who prioritizes the rack time over hanging out and socializing, they would call them a rack hound. And they give these guys a hard time for trying to get enough sleep.
So, yes, a little bit. The Army was different, and I was kind of guilty of this because you had a lot of guys that would go to the gym during their off time, or they would go and hang out with other guys and play video games if they were available, or um, you know they would find a guitar and go and jam out or do whatever. I would always try to collect as much sleep as I could. Um, and I would have been that rack hound. So my experience being infantry on the ground in a combat scenario was a little bit different because as soon as we got back from Solder City, that's when I turned into a rack hound. And
Yeah.
I think the biggest reason for that is the first week in Solder City, actually the first complete 5 days we were there. I think I got a total of maybe 8 hours of sleep out of 5 days.
That's just exhaustion right there. That's the definition.
I know our 4-man team was awake for 72 hours straight. I want to say we each got a little bit of a cat nap before it was interrupted by a firefight. And then we were trying to take little cat naps here and there, but it was maybe 10 minutes before bursts of fire. And then we all had to be up and on guns. So I think we went 104 hours before any single one of us got any real downtime. And that was for maybe 45 minutes. So 104 hours of constantly going, moving, shifting position, on gun, on scope, trying to radio in positions. And I can tell you, you do start to see things. You do start to hallucinate things. You're not effective on communications over the radio. You are absolutely not an effective force multiplier, which is what a sniper team is supposed to be. But that was the best that we could provide until we got some sort of reinforcements. And by the time we got reinforcements, it was a full platoon that came up into our position and just let us rack out for like 8 hours.
Yeah, sure. And I think that's probably the biggest difference about being, in a combat situation and being on just routine patrols where, you've got the rack available and people are like, I'm going to do that. Like, I'm going to do that thing if I can. But obviously when you have your peers giving you a hard time for trying to get enough sleep or, like get your circadian rhythm right, that's got to be rough.
Yeah. And we made a lot of stupid decisions because we were tired that we thought were tactical brilliance at the time. We set up claymores pointing down a staircase. We also tied them to a grenade bouquet so that if anyone tripped the claymore, it was also going to pull the pins on, I think it was 7 grenades and drop them down the stairs as well so that they would bounce everywhere.
That sounds genius.
It was genius to us at the time.
Yeah, sure.
The problem was it was friendlies that came up the stairs first.
Sure.
So as soon as we heard, Scorpion entering the building, we were like, wait a minute. Stop. Hold on. Wait a minute. Scorpion, like, 3rd platoon? Stop where you are. Just let us disarm this. Give us a second. So we held up an entire platoon at the bottom of a 4-story building because we didn't want to kill our guys. At least we had the presence of mind to do that. So, it's very, very weird and different when you're sleep deprived and under pressure to perform. And exhaustion is not always avoidable. But one of the things that military organizations and emergency responders, healthcare workers, pilots, transportation professionals, all kinds of professions have understood for years is that exhaustion creates risk, and you have to mitigate that. It's not because exhausted people suddenly become incompetent, but because small mistakes, they start stacking together like Legos. You miss a detail, you forget a step, you overlook information, and then another small mistake happens, and then another, and they compound until eventually something breaks. So we were making very, very small mistakes, but over time, that one small mistake became 50, became 150, and we could have killed somebody very, very quickly, and it would have been our fault.
Sure. And I mean, I've experienced this obviously not to that level of like the life and deathy stuff, but I've experienced this pretty regularly just during like long travel periods for work. Like anybody who's spent enough time in airports eventually reaches a point where every terminal kind of starts to look identical. And the airport is just a super weird place. It's almost lawless, right? Like you can just sort of sleep anywhere on the floor and have a beer at 7 a.m., but a bottle of water costs $8. Like it's a weird thing. But, when you're traveling and crossing time zones and changing schedules and sleeping in unfamiliar places, living off bad food, airport food, foreign food, and then trying to remember whether you're flying home or away from home. It's amazing how quickly simple decisions start requiring a little extra effort.
That sounds like Fight Club.
It is totally Fight Club sometimes. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, when you're traveling, I think the thing too, when you're traveling overseas, and I'll do some training in like austere environments sometimes, and this is something I think a lot of people don't realize is you know like I'll tell people I'm going somewhere like Colombia. I'm going to Colombia, and somebody's like, "Oh my god, I love Colombia." It's like, yeah, not not where the Navy base is. You don't like you might love like Cartagena, but you don't love where I'm going. And that's the thing is all the places where the military operates in these countries that you think you love are not the resort areas. And so it is kind of funny when you're eating food that your belly doesn't agree with, and you're already sleep deprived simply because of jet lag and things like that. And then you're trying to help these units out, and they're always like, "Oh, hey, let's go do let's go do training at night." Because obviously it's like tactically they want to be, tactically competent when things are a little tougher. And so then you're staying up later and things like that. And I've had so many instances where I'm on a boat trying to do like tactical operations training, and I'm just so tired, and I'm just, drinking something that I think says Diet Coke in Malaysian, like that it just happens, you know.
And that's the weird thing is airports are always this weird time suck. So all of the time travel movies and the Langoliers and the Stephen King novels and stuff like that
Sure.
that happen at airports, I'm like, yeah, that checks.
It makes sense. Yeah, exactly. Because they're like 24-hour all the time little mini cities.
They are. And, I saw similar things during extended patrols and long Overwatch assignments where there comes a point where you're still technically functioning, but you can feel the gears grinding. Like every movement you make comes with a cost, and you're slower to process information. Your patience shrinks. You can feel it, your patience actually depleting. Even though nothing is going on, you feel your battery just draining. Uh, you find yourself double checking things you normally wouldn't need to double check. Uh, the and for example, there was one particular mission. This was just a simple Overwatch mission. We had to overwatch a radio bunker that it was a old, non-used bunker that was a former radio station for the Saddam regime before it fell, and uh, it was packed full of munitions. So EOD had to go in and blow it up, destroy all these munitions. Well, EOD needs security because they have a job to do. We were going to provide security, and turns out that these munitions had mustard gas in them.
Yeah,
Great.
nice. Yeah.
Now we're in the middle of July in Iraq on Iraqi rooftops
All mopped up.
in Mop 4. And it took about 14 hours to provide Overwatch.
Oh,
So that's one of those times you can feel your battery just depleting by the minute. And every time you hear chatter over the radio, it's what the hell is it now? Unless you are calling me to get me off of this roof, I truly do not care. Unless you are bringing me water, I don't care. What do you want? And the dangerous part is you still feel capable enough to keep going, but every time you shift in your seat or adjust your position, you can feel your joints grinding because that cost is there.
Sure. And I think that's one of the biggest traps. Exhaustion doesn't usually arrive with a giant flashing warning light. It's gradual. If somebody handed you 10 pounds of whatever and said, hey, carry this, you'd notice immediately. But if they added 1 ounce every day, you might not notice until you're carrying something far heavier than what you intended. This is literally it's the frog gradually in the boiling pot.
That's probably the best analogy for exhaustion I've ever heard because most people don't wake up one morning exhausted. Every once in a while it happens where you just sleep like crap and you're like, oh, I don't want to get out of bed. But they drift into it. It's a late night here, a stressful week there, a project that runs long, an illness, a family issue, a travel schedule. Individually, none of those things seem overwhelming, but collectively, they add up like the nickels that Jim put into Dwight's phone in the office.
And and eventually you smack yourself in the face, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah. And then suddenly you're standing in your kitchen trying to remember whether you've already fed the dog or not.
And meanwhile, the dog is looking you in the eye like he's absolutely willing to lie about it if it results in second dinner, which they will. Ours do it all the time, and we call them out on that bullshit whenever they try it, and they still try it.
Yeah, dogs are remarkably adaptable when food is involved or anything cellophane.
Yes, they really are. And they're not just adaptable, they're resilient.
They're very resilient. That's true. They are resilient.
Everything from couch cushions to stuffy toys to grass clippings are on the menu.
but this is where preparedness starts intersecting with reality. We spend a lot of time discussing equipment failures and communications failures and power failures or weather events and emergency plans, all that kind of stuff. We don't spend nearly as much time talking about the reality that sometimes the weakest point in the system is the exhausted human operating it.
Yeah, that's right. We did a little bit when we talked about the episode before where we talked about my seizure event.
Sure, yeah.
But I think that leads directly into something that we'll spend more time on in the next section, which is the fact that exhaustion doesn't just affect individuals. I mean, it affects families, teams, communities, and especially relationships. You're married, I'm married, because when people get tired enough, they stop making mistakes with equipment and start making mistakes with each other, and that can put a nail in the coffin very, very quickly.
Sure. And that may actually be one of the most overlooked consequences of exhaustion. Everybody expects tired people to make mistakes. Sure. What they don't expect is how quickly exhaustion starts affecting relationships. Patience disappears, empathy shrinks, small problems suddenly feel much bigger than they actually are. And, you find yourself getting irritated by things that normally wouldn't bother you. If somebody asks a perfectly reasonable question, internally you're thinking, if one more person asks me where the extra batteries are, then I will become the emergency.
Yeah. Thankfully, you're not in Mop 4, or hopefully
Right.
you're not in Mop 4 when they ask it. So what's interesting is that most people don't recognize that's happening in real time. right? It's weird to kind of detach yourself, and we always assume the problem is the other person. That coworker is annoying. That customer is being difficult. The neighbor is frustrating. Your spouse is being unreasonable or not listening to everything that you're saying. Sometimes that is absolutely true. And that can be very difficult to cope with. But sometimes you're just exhausted. And one of the reasons the community becomes so important during difficult periods is because other people can often see the warning signs before we do and help to talk us back off that ledge.
Sure. And that's actually a really good callback to episode 97. One of the benefits of having like good, strong relationships is that trusted people can occasionally look at you and say, hey, you're running yourself into the ground. And, we don't always listen, but it's good to have that valuable feedback. And this kind of plays into the whole lone wolf thing, too. We've talked about this. This is I think this is probably the most just brushed off lone wolf fallacy thing, right? People think about I get it. Like it'd be harder to hunt and do security all night and tend to garden myself and do self surgery. But they don't think about the fact that just having that other person there to reality check you is so huge because, yeah, the lone wolf thing, you're just your own bad idea all the time.
And sometimes that's absolutely right. One thing I've noticed over the years is that exhausted people often become incredibly efficient at solving the wrong problem. And not listening is one of those things that I'm very good at. I have to constantly try to ego check um, and ego
Sure.
check myself before I start solving the wrong problem. Um, focus on whatever is immediately in front of me because I don't have that mental bandwidth to step back and evaluate the bigger picture. And when I'm not exhausted, I'm really good at big scope. But when I get tired, when I get worn down, when I get exhausted, I focus in so narrowly that I lose sight of that. And it's one of those things I'm trying to work on resiliency wise. And a lot of people do the same thing. So
Sure.
that's something to work on.
Yeah, and I've seen that constantly during travel. You can always identify like the families that don't travel together often, or it's like the first time the family's traveling after the new baby, and you can pick them out because they're just so frazzled, right? Somebody is so focused on making a connection that they forgot to eat or forgot to hydrate or they skip rest. And, then they spend the next 12 hours wondering why they feel terrible. And, they successfully solved one problem and then accidentally created three new ones.
Yeah, and preppers do this too. So somebody becomes so focused on optimizing one aspect of preparedness that they neglect everything else, right? So the irony is that exhaustion often narrows perspective in exactly the same way that panic does. It's a different cause, but a similar outcome. And something to be very aware of because you can be panicked and exhausted at the same time.
And I think this is where we need to talk about the myth of toughing it out because preparedness culture, the military culture, the first responder culture, and honestly, just modern work culture all tend to kind of glorify the idea of just pushing through. There are times when pushing through is absolutely necessary. Don't get me wrong. Emergencies don't always happen on convenient schedules. Responsibilities don't always wait for these ideal conditions. But eventually, there comes a point where pushing through stops being strength and literally just starts being stubbornness.
I would tend to agree, although I would add one caveat to that. I think people sometimes hear conversations like this and swing kind of too far in the opposite direction. They start treating any discomfort as a sign they need to stop immediately. That's not the lesson either. Resilience requires effort. It's not easy. Adaptation requires effort. It's not easy. Growth requires effort. It's not easy. The question is whether you're managing that effort intelligently or just wasting breath.
Sure, and that's fair. And there's a difference between being tired and being depleted. Everybody has days where they're just tired, and everybody has days where they don't feel like they're doing the thing. And we're talking about something different. We're talking about the point where your decision making and awareness and judgment relationships are actively degrading.
I would say that's a much better way to frame it because one thing transportation safety studies have repeatedly shown is that severe sleep deprivation can impair performance in ways comparable to alcohol impairment, just like
Sure.
Mythbusters showed.
Yep.
So think about that for a second, right? Most people would never, most people would never intentionally make important decisions after several drinks. I say most people because we'll just leave it at most people.
Sure. Most people.
Yet people routinely make major decisions while severely exhausted and assume they're functioning normally, right? Doing your taxes at 3 o'clock in the morning after a long flight, after a hard week at work, while you've been on the road, that's probably not the best financial decision you've ever made.
Sure. And that's the scary part, that exhausted people are often terrible judges of their own exhaustion or their own impairment. Nobody wakes up and says, you know what? Today seems like a fantastic day to make poor decisions. I mean, sometimes people do, but for the most part, let's talk in broad generalities here. So,
Yay,
that's just,
meth!
yeah, that's just not how it works, right? The brain experiencing the impairment is also the brain evaluating the impairment.
Yeah, that's a design flaw I would like to formally complain about. Where do I submit
Yeah.
that ticket?
I think we'd probably all sign that petition. But also, the one thing I'd like to talk about too in this whole exhaustion thing is that our diet plays a huge part in this whole exhaustion discussion, especially if we're in that heightened prepper mindset where we're working a patrol around our property, or we're preparing for the weather event, or we're trying to keep our whole family safe when we got moved to the FEMA camp, right? Like, I want to chat about some of the simple, pragmatic dietary things we can do to actually help fight exhaustion. And it's kind of crazy and it's pretty obvious, but there are things you can do because you can rely on nutrient dense whole foods and specific supplements kind of designed to stabilize your energy levels, improve oxygen flow, things like that, prevent the blood sugar crashes are the big ones, right? And so I think there's a couple of things you can do. The nutrient dense snacks is one, like having the almonds and the bananas, the healthy fats, things like that. The fiber, potassium, B vitamins are a huge one that keep the metabolism moving along without triggering like that sugar crash or that weird like caffeine jitters. Like, I think people underestimate the power of B vitamins.
I will crush some regular roasted salted almonds. Not the honey roasted ones, but just
The regular
plain.
salted ones, is that
Oh,
that's your
that
go-to protein food?
that is my go-to protein food, and they're like $1.50 for a cup and a half at Kroger.
What's the brand I forget which brand it is that makes all the like the different flavors of.
Planters?
Is it Planters that does all the different flavors of almonds? I don't think it's Planters. It's the little like tin can thing, but I get the wasabi ones, like wasabi almonds.
Those are
That's what's
good.
up. Yeah, like just a
Those are
little
good,
bit of
yeah.
spice to get me going, but I think that has the protein that I need, but those are probably my big one. Like if I'm like I need the protein now to, keep my stomach from growling.
Those are really good if you're sick too, because those will clear out your sinuses quick, fast, and in a
Exactly.
hurry.
Yeah, it clears out the sinuses too. That's exactly right.
Yeah, and along with that, complex carbs and greens. So if you swap out simple carbohydrates for whole grains like oatmeal and quinoa, they offer a slow and steady release of glucose. Leafy greens like spinach, they're high in iron, which it actually does improve oxygen flow in the blood, especially if you live in a mosquito dense area like I do,
Oh,
high
okay. Interesting.
high iron can help fight off anemia. Uh,
Interesting. Sure.
and then energy boosting supplements. If you have dietary deficiencies, supplements like magnesium, vitamin C, coenzyme Q10, or it's also known as CoQ10, you'll often hear it referred to as CoQ10, that can support cellular energy production and reduce daily exhaustion. A lot of these you can find in multivitamin supplements, or you can find in things like Element. You can find an Element or liquid IV drink packs. Pedialyte, the dry packs, they work as well, but those are more focused on children's dietary health.
Sure.
So,
Yeah,
uh,
and there's a bunch of those natural remedies out there too, like ginseng. I remember ginseng was like the big thing, like back in the day, like when we were kids. Is like that was just one of those things that had just like recently crossed the Pacific or something. But it really is that traditional herbal remedy thing that's known for reducing the mental and physical fatigue. So I think obviously maybe it's all just like witchcrafty stuff, but I've never had an issue with ginseng. And then obviously, of course, hydration, man. Never underestimate the fatigue fighting power of plain water. Like mild dehydration is one of the leading causes of just that like daytime exhaustion, like daytime sleepiness. And these are all things that can really help you fight and recover from exhaustion.
it's weird that I started drinking. I have a water bottle that sits next to my desk, and while I'm just working throughout the day, I started timing that I will drink a full bottle of water, 32 ounces, between 11 a.m. and noon. And the need I feel to take a nap has diminished greatly.
Interesting. Really, just staying hydrated. That's kind of crazy. Dude, I got in Battle Box, I got this Grail water filter. It is awesome. And it was it's kind of like it's weird. It's like a French pressy type thing, right? So it's like a big bottle. You just scoop up water and then you take the water bottle part and you push it down and the filter is on the bottom of sort of that inner water bottle. And so as you push down on this thing, it filters water through their filter. And it was awesome. Like, man, this is something that I'm going to take, backpacking and check out the filter. I ended up taking it with me. Didn't even use my MSR filter. I used this Grail thing the whole time. And then I said, man, this would be great to take traveling with me. So naturally I have to go buy another one and I go look on their website and they've got a titanium one. So now of course I have to go buy the
Of course.
titanium one. And then they've got a smaller one. I'm like, oh, this is something I can put in my get home bag. And so now, yeah, like BattleBox sends me this free one and now I'm into this company like $1,000. But having a water bottle everywhere you go and having good clean water is just a huge way to fight exhaustion. I think people don't think about like, yeah, just staying hydrated is so huge that people just don't ever think about that water is one of those things that really can help you recover from exhaustion.
And if you're one of those people that just cannot drink plain water, get yourself a bottle of Mio or Element
Yeah.
or something to flavor it. They make energy Mio, they make little packets that you can mix into it. You're just going to have to wash your water bottle a little bit more often to keep it from getting sticky and attracting weird flies and bacteria and stuff like that. But
Little pink Himalayan sea salt and some lime juice, man. It's like 0 calorie and like hydrating and good for you and it tastes delicious.
yeah, so you're getting just a little bit more involved in preparing your water, but you're still getting hydration out of it and you're getting the electrolytes out of that pink Himalayan sea salt. Go for it. Get hydrated. Stop getting exhausted. And I think one of the practical takeaways here is that recovery isn't laziness, right? Recovery is maintenance. We understand this concept for equipment. I mean, if somebody told you they never changed the oil in their vehicle because maintenance is for weak people, you would truly question their judgment immediately on why they're trying to sell you a 1998 Toyota Celica.
Right. But that Toyota motor's still going to go with never having an oil change. I don't know why, man. That's
Probably,
magical.
especially, and they probably dug it out of, Boston Harbor. But
Yeah. Sure.
yet people will run themselves into the ground and somehow view recovery as optional. And it's just not. And I also think it's really important to bring up that exhaustion isn't strictly a sleep problem. It's oftentimes an energy regulation or cellular production issue. I mean, we're getting a little bit biological here, but if your body cannot repair properly or produce adenosine triphosphate overnight, also known as ATP, that's your cellular energy. We all learned that back in high school, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Well, ATP, adenosine triphosphate, breaks down into ADP, adenosine diphosphate, once it's burned. That's what your mitochondria are actually producing. So if you can't produce enough of that overnight, you will wake up drained. So a lot of this goes back to our prepper burnout episode. Cortisol dysregulation is a huge contributor to exhaustion, which is when chronic stress keeps nighttime stress hormones elevated. That's going to prevent your nervous system from fully relaxing and regenerating during the night. And obviously, mental and emotional depletion is something that people like us that are trying to pace out every step of their lives are predisposed to. We live at that higher level of stress, just one step above. So we have to constantly try to pull ourselves back down from the brink. And things like overthinking, burnout, emotional strain, they're going to drain the brain's reserves in ways that just lying down, they can't restore.
Yeah, and preppers especially understand the preventive maintenance thing, right? We all do that. We get it. We rotate our food, we test our batteries, we inspect our gear, we maintain our generators and change the oil. I just did that the other day, and my generator, it doesn't have an oil filter, which I thought was really weird. Like, I don't know, maybe most generators don't. I just thought that was odd. Like, it doesn't have an oil filter. But the oil was good, so I'm all good. That one I only run
It
propane
wasn't
in it.
goopy.
No, it wasn't goopy. And this is the thing, dual fuel and tri-fuel generators are what's up, because if you never run gas through that carburetor, you're really never going to mess the carburetor up. You're not going to run ethanol through it and dry out the carburetor and that kind of stuff. If you're only running propane through that motor, it's way cleaner. It's crazy that I admittedly didn't change the oil for like a year, and I did run the generator a lot, but it was just great oil. I mean, I'm sure chemically it was probably broken down a little, but it wasn't like black sludgy oil, which really surprised me because I'm hunting around this thing for a oil filter, which it just didn't happen. But anyway, we do all this stuff. We replace worn equipment, and then somehow we act surprised when the human operating all of this equipment also requires maintenance.
Exactly. And to be 100% fair, the operator is part of the system.
Honestly, the operator is usually the most important part of the system. Without the operator pulling the little lever, none of the other stuff downrange happens.
I would argue that's absolutely true. Every prepper plan ultimately depends on the prepper, right? Every communication plan depends on the people receiving the message. Every emergency response depends on people. Every community depends on people, and people do have limits. There's no way around it.
And I think that's one of the biggest lessons from this episode is limits are not weakness, right? They're realities. And the goal isn't becoming some mythical person who never ever gets tired and never gets stressed and never needs help and never needs rest, because that person just doesn't exist.
What does exist are people who recognize those limits and build systems around them. They prioritize recovery. They are the ones who lean on community when necessary, and they adapt when circumstances change. They recognize when their performance is degrading. And in in many ways, that's what this entire series has been building toward.
Yeah. I mean, think about where we've been over the last 4 episodes now, right? Panic taught us that emotional responses can be managed, and the community preparedness episode taught us that nobody really succeeds entirely alone. And then obviously the last episode, our adaptation episode, taught us that flexibility often matters more than perfection. And now we're talking about exhaustion, and that teaches us that even capable people eventually hit their limits.
Yeah, and that really does bring us to next week's conversation because once you accept that panic happens, it's going to, community does matter, adaptation is necessary, and exhaustion eventually catches everyone, a much bigger question starts emerging. And that's what actually allows people to keep going? What separates people who recover from people who collapse? And what allows somebody to remain functional through adversity without becoming consumed by it?
Yeah, and that's exactly what we're going to explore with Dr. Stephen Taylor. I'm looking forward to this. I think having an actual, real professional, like a professional, like head doctor, is going to be kind of fun. Like, I think that's going to be kind of cool. I bet a lot of our listeners have never listened to an interview like that. And if you have enjoyed this series so far, next week is where kind of all these ideas come together. So I'm looking forward to that.
I'm willing to bet not only have they not listened to an interview, I'm willing to bet, like most people, most of our listeners have not actually seen a professional head doctor.
Probably not. I mean, you're right. And yeah, and here's the thing is the guy, he's Australian, so I'm naturally gonna like do Australian accent stuff, and we're gonna have to bring up Mad Max a lot. Like we're
Of
not gonna make
course.
it super boring, right? Yeah. So yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to wrapping this whole thing up, and I would like to know from people what they thought of this. This is kind of the end of this series, right? We did this 4-part resiliency series, and then the 5th episode next week's is gonna have a guest, an actual real professional, to talk about resilience. And this dude's written like 20 books or something, which is crazy. And he wrote a book about, this is what's nuts. He wrote a book about the psychology of pandemics that came out like late 2019, right? He was working on this thing for however long, and then it comes out like late 2019. He may have been in on it, man. I don't know.
Yeah, he wrote it before COVID and it was published like, yeah, wasn't it published like a couple months before
Yeah,
COVID?
within a month or two of COVID happening. I just thought that was crazy. And then he wrote after that, which is nuts. He kind of fact checked himself because after COVID, so years later, he writes another book about like kind of part 2, the psychology of pandemics, which I think is kind of cool, right? He could look back on what he sort of, I guess, predicted and then kind of fact check himself later. So anyway, yeah, pretty interesting, man. He's an interesting guy. I think it'll be fun to, I've never done an interview like that, right? With somebody who's an honest to God, like, PhD level professional who's like way smarter than me. So I'm interested to see where this takes us.
Yeah, it's going to be a good interview, I think. I'm excited for it for next week. But before we wrap up, I do think it's worth leaving listeners with one final thought here. Exhaustion is not a sign that you have failed, right? Panic is not a sign that you have failed. The inability to adapt immediately is not a sign that you've failed. If your community is collapsing around you, it's not a sign of failure, right? This is often a sign that you have been carrying something heavy for a long time. So the key is recognizing when it's time to recover before exhaustion starts making decisions on your behalf without your permission.
Yeah, and trust me, exhausted you is not nearly as smart as well rested you thinks exhausted you is.
That is probably one of the more accurate statements in this entire episode.
Yeah, I have several airport layovers and long travel stories to confirm that. So yeah.
I've definitely got some patrol logs laying around the house that should probably remain classified for similar reasons. Yeah.
that's probably all for the best. So anyway, yeah, this has actually been kind of fun. I don't know if there is another topic that we could throw 4 or 5 episodes at and be able to talk about it in this depth. And if someone else thinks that there's another series we could do, yeah, I'm happy to look into it. This was obviously a very fun one to research. This was really outside of my comfort zone when we started looking into these kinds of episodes and that
For sure.
mental and that psychological resilience. So yeah, this has been interesting. I've learned a ton. I have learned a ton. I've done a lot of self-reflection, and I think if anybody is honest with themselves and actually listened through these and stuck this out with us, I think that they will find that we at least poked the little self-reflection bear a couple of times. So, if that happened, mission accomplished. And after that, after we get through episode 100, then we will get back to telling you the best place to buy $1 worth of beans and shit like that.
Yeah. So if you do have a series idea for us, hit us up at stakeholderprepping@gmail.com. You can always visit stakeholderprepping.com, grab some new merch. Of course, be on the lookout for the new limited edition t-shirts that we are always dropping. And episode 104 is coming up quickly. You still have time to get your questions into us for the Q&A, but we are going to be launching those brand new listener-inspired t-shirts for episode 104. So be on the lookout for those. Those are going to be cool. I am super excited for those to drop.
This will be fun. I'm really excited. We've got a lot of really good quotes in, so this is gonna be pretty fun. But yeah, this has been exciting. I think doing these kinds of episodes is probably something a lot of the other preparedness podcasts don't do. And honestly, I get it. If you're probably sitting there thinking that this is a topic that maybe isn't that interesting to a lot of the self-described preppers. And I would push back a little and say, well, it should be.
Yeah, it's not sexy. It's not glorified zombie,
Right.
Shoot them in the face with all kinds of guns and gear. But this is something that I feel is actually going to help you survive when shit hits the fan.
Yeah. Oh, 100%, man. Yeah. This isn't the typical prepper talk radio stuff. Yeah, you're right. It isn't that sexy, and it is a bit vulnerable, right? To think about that, like to actually reflect on your own like mental defects and try to fix those things. It's very vulnerable to do that. Like I think preppers in general are like, I don't need any of that stuff. I'll just need my 5.56 and I'm all good to go.
Yeah, give me my can of beans and get off my lawn.
Yeah, get off my lawn.
Here's your gut check. So, come back next week for our interview with Dr. Stephen Taylor on resilience as we wrap up this entire series. But until then, remember, you are your own stakeholder, and we will see you then.